From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. Cannot wait. They are very clever blokes. Very clever blokes. Glad you got to spend some time with them. See all of that next week. On this show tonight, as always, let's try and get the other 23 hours we're not on the telly into this 1 hour of TV, but we'll do our best. Now, there is a battle that is looming and it's going to cost you more money. It's a battle between the federal government and the Reserve Bank about what is actually going on in our economy. It all comes back to cost of living and inflation in particular. Now, of course, cost of living, laser-like focus, number one issue in the country. We talk about it each and every day. Now, reality here is that we are seeing there's an awful lot of people that are putting off major purchases at the moment because of how expensive everything else is. As our mates from Turbans for Australia told us the other night in Melbourne, there are people who are going to places to collect free food because they can move that $80 and spend it somewhere else. Well, people currently are putting off seeing a health professional as a result of the cost of living crisis. According to the ABS, 1 in 5 people, or 19.3%, say that cost is one reason for delaying or not seeing a health professional for their mental health when needed. That rose to 16%. As you can see, there is quite the problem here. Now, when you have a look here on this particular graph, I want to show you from everyone over the age of 15 the types of things people are delaying. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are the richest or the poorest, the blue line there is dental. And up to 25% of people who are in significant financial damage, they're putting it off right now. Best part of 20%, slightly higher than that, and even the people who are supposedly the least disadvantaged, they're doing it by about 10 to 15%. But as you can see, medical specialists, prescription medications, going to the GP, after-hours GPs or hospitals, all of them down in terms of people visiting them because of the costs associated. Now, while the reality is that while the federal budget may well be in a surplus, as we've shown you many times, the receipts to prove it, the data behind it, remember, that's what we do. We don't just mouth off. We try to show you the stuff behind the opinion. That we've told you many times before that while the federal budget's going okay, the average household is now in a recession. They've had more than 6 months of their economy, unit by unit, quarter acre by quarter acre, or farm by farm, tightening over the past 6 months, and it's going to get worse, apparently, all the way till the back end of 2025. Which brings us to the great passenger, the man who's already hanging out his shingle to be the next Prime Minister of Australia, Grim Jim, last weekend doing all of the fluffy profiles, saying he doesn't drink anymore because when he did used to drink, he was a bit loose around Parliament House. Please explain. Next question. Now, of course, they have said, this being the federal government, that the reason why we're in the issues that we are currently with inflation, it's all to do with everything overseas. The government has no role whatsoever to play in inflation. Of course, it's not true, but this is their talking point.
Post the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well, that has had an impact on global inflation.
Obviously, the geopolitics and conflict, a war in Europe.
Recovering post-COVID.
Conflict in the Middle East and uncertainty elsewhere, and the Chinese economy, particularly the property sector in China, but more broadly as well.
The Chinese property sector is affecting inflation in Australia. Well, I've called BS on that from the second they started to say it, because it is a political tactic. If they can pretend that everything is cyclical, then nothing is personal. They hold no responsibility. If they can pretend that everything is to do with overseas, then it's none of the decisions that they are making, or more importantly, not making here. Well, I have a strange bedfellow in this argument now, which is the Governor of the Reserve Bank. Now, when you have tension between what the government is doing and the Reserve Bank is doing, we're going to end up in a world of trouble here, where the government continues to be deaf, dumb and blind, and there's only one switch that the Reserve Bank can flick, and that means higher interest rates, which of course feeds back into a whole world of pain that the government will then turn around and say, nothing to see here, not our fault. Remember, they were able to, bizarrely, successfully claim that it was all the former Reserve Bank governors' fault that we've had an elbow dozen of interest rates, 13 overall. You see, they love shifting blame. Remember, what politicians do is more important than what they say. And when the Reserve Bank governor comes out and says, no, it's the issues in this country that are driving inflation, not necessarily everything that's happening overseas.
The remaining inflation challenge we're dealing with is increasingly homegrown and demand-driven.
Now, how do I make this point even clearer? If we go on the monthly numbers that come out from the Bureau of Statistics, let me show you that while the average for overall inflation in the country is 5% and a bit, there are lots of different things in the economy that are counted as part of inflation that are way higher than 5, way higher than 10. Now, have a look at these. Number one, chief amongst them, petrol. It's why I constantly talk about the need for this government to cut fuel taxes by 25 cents. But OK, we don't make fuel here. It does come in from overseas and it will obviously be affected by oil supply. So OK, let's take that off the table. Well, what about electricity? The reality is that the reason electricity has gone up, they'll tell you it's all to do with the war in Ukraine. Well, of course, that all depends on us importing things like coal for coal-fired power, but of course we don't, which means the international price is irrelevant and often deals have been done many years in advance. So the reality of why electricity is as high as it is because this government is committed to changing the electricity grid from the one that served us so well into the one that will make them feel better as we bid for things like UN climate conferences in the next few years. OK, that's nothing to do with the rest of the world. Gas and household fuels, again, all here. Transport, again, here. Bread and cereal products, we are not importing an awful lot of those, we make them here, yet they are almost double the rate of national inflation. Insurance and financial services, that, yes, is to do with what happens in this country. Things like youth crime that mean that if you live in a high crime area, you have to pay more for your insurance. If you live in an area that's had floods and fires and all the rest of it, you have to pay more. That, of course, extends across the millions of people who have insurance across the country. So that's something that's absolutely within our borders. We don't import milk or milk-related products. Rent keeps going up because of the number of people that are chasing fewer and fewer homes, including immigration. Tobacco. Now, tobacco, of course, keeps going up because the taxes on it keep going up. Now, Tommy Lee, the world-famous drummer from Motley Crue, he comes to Australia and couldn't believe that to buy a couple of packets of cigarettes, we're going to throw him back the best part of $250. I think he might have been paying with cartons, but you get my point. The reality is that tobacco is not expensive on the other side of the world. It's expensive here because of its taxation. And housing, again, completely irrelevant what the Chinese property market is doing. It keeps going up in terms of inflation because there's fewer houses, more people. That, in part, is what the Reserve Bank Governor was saying. However, the Reserve Bank Governor may want to be careful here because she's going a little bit in the former Optus CEO's direction when she starts to talk about the little indices that are in the economy that are signs that interest rates are not slowing people's spending.
The second indicator of inflation being driven by domestic demand is that it's increasingly underpinned by services. Hairdressers, dentists, dining out, sporting and other recreational activities, the prices of all these services are rising strongly.
Hang on. Inflation? We're not putting up interest rates because the price of a haircut is going up. But let's be serious. One of the reasons why it is because, or any of those services or anything linked back to a business, is because the cost of doing business continually goes up in Australia because your rent keeps going up, or more likely, if you've been able to somehow lock down the rent or you own the commercial property, or maybe even you're working from home, power. You see, there's a direct link between the cost of staying open and the cost that you have to pass on to the customer. When the government is committed to policies that increase the cost of energy, it increases the cost of doing business, which means you have to end up paying more as a result of it. All of it is interlinked. But the government wants to pretend to say, nothing to see here. The other problem, of course, with the Reserve Bank is they only have one thing to do, and that is to put up or to push down interest rates. Now, immediately, to make sure that there is less money moving around the economy to buy things and therefore inflation starts to fall, The idea is to keep pushing them up until people start to tighten their belts. But as we've shown you multiple times, that really only applies to about a third, maybe 2/3, but definitely only a third of the Australian economy. Because according to the census, again, we show you the data, we show you the receipts, so when you have an argument with your friends, you've got the data to be able to push back on, or just send them the video, skynews.com.au, or send the YouTube out as well. Of course, a third of the country is renting. 35% of the country is currently trying to pay their house off. And I should say, apologies, 31% owned outright. Interest rates don't matter. But 35% who are trying to pay it off, that matters. And presumably to the 30% of people who rent, whose houses, say that 3 times when you're trying to remember everything at once. Those houses, of course, are owned by somebody else and they're trying to pay them back to the bank. So the truth is that the people who are owning their houses outright, well, they don't feel the same pain when it comes to interest rates. Now, if you're one of those people who's worked their ass off and paid their house off, I'm not having a crack at you. It's just the Reserve Bank has no way, for want of a better term, to control your spending. But also, the richer you go up the line, the easier it is to absorb the interest rate rises. But because we live in a society where, as long as I'm in the lifeboat, who cares about anyone else, the rich people keep spending, which means that the problem of spending in the economy keeps going on. Now, again, just because you own a home doesn't mean that you're rich, but think the inner city seats, think the Teal seats here. They, in part, are part of the problem. And then there is, of course, the issue that while the government says, oh, we can't control any of that, but I've just shown you all of the things that they do have a say in, there's one thing that is causing huge inflation problems, and it's 100% the government's fault. That's immigration. You see, the busier our streets get, the busier our suburbs get. That is because the Australian population is growing at a particularly fast rate right now, and that is only happening because this government is importing the best part of 2,000 people a day. That is a decision by this government. That is an inflationary decision made by the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles. And that is because all of the people who put the federal budget together say you've got to tip in more people, even though more people, less houses pushes up things like housing demand and many of those other things that I just pointed that lead into inflation. Well, interestingly here, again, don't trust me. Let's have a look at what John Keogh had to say in the Financial Review. Migration is a link to inflation. So when the government says it's all global, it's garbage. They are in charge of how many people are being brought into the country every day. The arrival of almost 500,000 migrants over the past year is adding to inflation, with influence on the Reserve Bank of Australia's decision when it comes to rate rises. A former RBA economist says the migration surge is added to rent prices and total consumer spending, HSBC chief economist has told the Fin Review. While working migrants reduce labour shortages in sectors such as hospitality and dampen wage pressures, economists believe that, at least in the short term, the net effect of the large migration influx is higher inflation. Don't trust me, don't trust the Financial Review. Well, OK, what about a government apologist over on taxpayer television? Ian Verondon wrote this for the ABC's website in the past couple of days, even though it comes with a juicy little caveat, despite the fact that he argues against himself in his own article. But here we go. All those people arriving need somewhere to live, and the increased demand is driving rents higher. Rent is part of what we count with inflation. More people, fewer places, higher rents is part of the calculation of inflation. The problem is likely to compound into the future. It takes years to build a house or a block of units. Then consider the vast number of builders who've gone bust and the new dwelling approvals that this year have slumped to decade lows, partly because of soaring interest rates. Now, this is the bit where, of course, he doesn't get lynched while he's leaving the building. This is not and should not be an argument against immigration, multiculturalism, race or diversity. It's an issue that revolves around simple arithmetic. Well, nice try, Ian, but the reality is the main point you made is the point that is pushing up rents, which are part of the cost of housing, which is part of the cost of inflation. The government decides how many people come in. So all of this, again, is to drive home the point. Do not buy the spin that the government has no role whatsoever when it comes to inflation, that it's all to do with Israel versus Gaza, that it's all to do with Ukraine versus Russia, because that's just not true. Again, we continue here. Another example about how hard it is to rent in Australia right now. Tenants are apparently being forced to pay up to $500 for a room in someone else's house. In the new flatmates.com survey of more than 10,000 Australians, 48% of renters stated their main reason for living in share accommodation is they can no longer afford to live alone. In Melbourne, one room in someone else's house. In St Kilda, it'll cost you $490. In Armidale, $400. In Collingwood, $400. In Paran, $400. In St Kilda East, $400. And it goes on and on and on. And this whole issue of population, its direct links to the cost of everything, the pressure on everything, well, we get more evidence about just how big Australia's going to go. Again, more predictions. We're on our way towards 40 million people. Now, think about this right now. In Queensland, there are people that are dying because there are not enough hospital beds and there are not enough ambulances to answer when 000 rings. Yet the endless plan of the big end of town and government is to add more people to the issue. Government turns around and puts out a shiny video every now and then that, OK, they might open an extra wing of a hospital here or there. But unless you're actually building something that is appropriate for the population, not just today, but into the future, the problem will continue. And just on that hospital situation that, of course, we told you about in great detail last night, the Queensland government is making decisions about what to do with its money. They are deciding to knock down the Gabba for the 2032 Olympics. They are choosing not to hire more ambulances. They are choosing not to build more hospital beds. They are choosing not to increase their health capacity because their assumption is that as a voter, if it's somebody else that dies in the back of the ambulance, you won't care because they're not a member of your family. Well, I trust that Australians can see what's happening here and will make the right decisions about governments that want to take care of everyone and keep those numbers down as low as possible. And by the way, that story in Queensland, it ain't a one-off. More than 20, almost 30 people have died since the last election in exactly the same circumstance. Don't forget, in Victoria, 33 people died because the 000 system didn't work. Yet we keep rehiring the same people who don't spend the money or make everything worse. Again, on population, let's have a look here at where we're going to be going by perhaps as late as 2070, but certainly within definitely our kids' or grandkids' lives. As you can see there, the very top, the dark blue line, is the high series of immigration, and that's basically the path that we're on right now. That means that we hit 40 million about 2063. Now, that's the predictions. You hit 45 million, so you're growing at an even faster rate, less than 10 years later. If we stop immigration completely, well, then our population starts to hold for a very long time and then it starts to drop off. Now, nobody's saying no to any form of immigration, but you see the great difference between the super priming that's happening now, which takes us to 45 million, versus a little bit that takes us to 2071 before we get to 30 million people, as opposed to 45 million people by 2071. These are all big issues and these are all things the government controls. Now, Chris Bowen. Casanova Bowen, as my mate Ray Hadley says, because every job he's ever had, he's got very intimate with, in terms of these, you get the joke. Now, we all know, 2019, Bill Shorten was having the exact same climate policies that Anthony Albanese has, that are the exact same climate policies that Gillard had, that are the exact same climate policies as Rudd had. But when he was pushed by our mate Jonathan Lee, he couldn't say how much the policies would cost. Because A, he didn't know, or B, they were so through the roof and it was literally trillions of dollars, and he knew that the Australian people would say no. But because he refused to put a number on it, in part, the Australian people said no. In fact, this was the best answer that he could give at the time.
3 more years of this government like the last 6, it'll be even more expensive to fix up the damage of climate change in 3 years if we don't start now.
So Albo decided to keep the same policies but tweak the message. He decided to go off and find modelling to pretend that there would be a huge amount of jobs and, of course, a major reduction in power prices. The media, of course, ate all of this up because they had felt that the climate change question was finally answered But the reality was it's not all upside. It's only been up cost every day since the bloke came to office. Now remember, this was the palaver that he sold before the previous election about what the shortened policies would end up producing. No focus on cost, only the benefit.
We've created 550,000 jobs since we came to office. The more jobs created on our watch than under any first-term government in Australia's history, and we're not even halfway through.
That number of 500,000. Now, he said that 500,000 would be just the green jobs. That total number is everything everywhere in the economy. So his promise is not coming true. And then, of course, to make sure that he didn't suffer the same political fate as Bill Shorten, we were promised a major reduction in our power bills.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
But every day since they became the government, they will not repeat the promise. And I hope that you will do what I've asked you to do, which was to get your power bill from May of 2022, to stick it on the fridge, and if you are $275 better off when it comes to that number, then you should vote for the Labor Party at the next federal election. But we all know you're not going to be. Instead, they're probably going to be able to say, well, we're $275 down on the record high, but you're still way higher than where you were before they made the promise. Now, of course, I say all of this because the reality is that they wanted to achieve the same policies since 2007. They, of course, were denied when Malcolm Turnbull got the biscuit as the Liberal Party leader. They were denied after the 2013 election, after the no carbon tax business. They were denied again in 2016. They were denied again in 2019. So they thought that this was the bow to wrap on it to get what they really wanted once they came back to government in 2022. And politically, it worked. But here is the reality. To get to 80% renewables, you need to spend T4 trillions of dollars to build them. Now, once they're built, they may well end up producing cheaper electricity, but you have to build them first. And that has been my argument for 10 years. Not that renewable energy wasn't going to be some sort of a better mousetrap, but the mousetrap's bloody expensive. And it's a huge impost on communities. 22,000 solar panels a day between now and 2030. Hundreds of thousands of wind farms. Where would they go? Well, of course, despite the fact that it's still 2023, people are panicking that we're not going to get to the right target by 2030.
Has the Minister received advice, formal or informal, that we're not on track to reach that 2030 emissions target?
So that's one of the reasons why we're not on track to meet the targets that the government's currently got legislated.
The climate accord in Paris, we're not on track to achieve it by a long, long way.
So the reality is that once all of these people started to come out and say, hey, you know that target that you only set 2 years ago, even though it's 7 years away, we don't think you're going to match it. We don't think you're going to get there. So, of course, guess what? Chris Bowen has now come up with a new way of achieving the exact same policy that the Labor Party has always had about moving to the amount of renewables that they want us to get to. And just as we warned you, just as we thought, it's not just the private sector, which means you pay as a customer, you will now pay billions of dollars as the taxpayer. But Chris Bowen thinks that he's been very clever here, which is that he's now got a whole new pot of money. He'll work together with states and private companies to build these things, but it'll basically be huge amounts of taxpayer money that will help, say, dollar for dollar investment. But you see, he thinks he's been very clever, 4D chess, Chris Bowen, because all of this money is not going to appear in a federal budget. Instead, because it's infrastructure and they've been able to convince someone somewhere that eventually they'll make their money back, because theoretically, after you've built an asset, then you can sell the asset off. But does anyone think that the Labor Party is about to help build an entire new electricity grid only to sell it off? Because we know what happened with the existing electricity grid as it went from state government hands to private company hands, and most of them having some connection back to China. No, this is exactly what we feared. which is the taxpayer is now on the hook for tens of billions of dollars, but it's all off budget. Just like the $300 billion for the submarines is off budget, which means the government will never have to tell us what the actual number is. And you see, what they're going to do is they're going to have this big pot of money and they're going to do deal after deal after deal after deal, and then they'll turn around and say it's commercial in confidence, we can't tell you how much money it is. So what we always thought to be true for the past 10 years is true, that this stuff is expensive to build. And you will either pay for it as a customer of a private company that has to build it, or you have to pay it as a taxpayer, because even if it's off budget, guess what? You still pay for it. We still borrow the money. It's still part of the overall debt picture. That means they make decisions about budget surpluses or deficits, and as we've shown you, the plan under this government for the next 40 years is deeper and deeper and deeper budget deficits. So when asked today, Chris Bowen would not say how much money the new secret fund that's off budget with deals that will become commercial in confidence actually is.
Can you level with the Australian public and tell us how much it will cost?
Well, it's an auction, PK. Now, when you're putting a house on the market, you don't issue a press release saying this is what we expect to get.
That's not the point. The point is that you are both the bank that is lending the money and the person who's trying to sell the house. Pick the metaphor here. Now, he thinks he's a genius. He thinks that this is 4D chess, because most of the media will, of course, not inquire about the cost of things. I saw interviews with him today where, again, he wasn't asked about the cost of things. The cost of this is the entire point. It has been the entire point of our politics for 10 years, yet everyone seemingly in the process now will not ask about the cost, but you pay anyway. Well, guess what? We can start to do the sums on just how much we are starting to look at. You see, he's already done a deal with the New South Wales government. He announced that yesterday. Now, he wants to get to 32 megawatts of energy. Now, under the deal that he did with the New South Wales government, he was able to create 1,000 megawatts. Now, he wants to get to 32 megawatts. The cost of producing 1,000 megawatts under this deal, $1.8 billion. Let's do the rough sums here. If we're trying to get to 32 megawatts, that'll cost $57 billion. Yet no one asked him about it today. If it's a private company, you pay. If it's a private company that goes 50-50 with government, you pay twice, because you pay as the government and you pay as the customer. And Chris Bowen says, how good am I? Because I'm hiding the numbers from everyone. We'll debate this and a whole lot more in a moment's time here on Paul Murray Live. Looking forward to it. In a moment's time with Steve Price and with Stephen Conroy. Tell me, who do you think's winner and loser of the week? Go and find us on the socials. And Dave Rubin in a few minutes' time. Just getting started. A lot to say tonight. All right, let's get into this right now. Inside the Tower of Talk in Melbourne, two of our best, none other than the great Steve Conroy and the wonderful Steve Price. Lovely to see you both. Comfortable, relaxed, excited.
Good to be here.
All right, now, Stephen Conroy, you can defend this in a second. Steve Price, let's talk sense before the spin kicks in. So Chris Bowen thinks he's come up with this wonderful genius idea, which is to get a fire hose of billions of dollars, basically go dollar for dollar with private companies to build tens of billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Now, for 10 years, I have said this is the issue. It's not whether it produces less CO2 than coal. It obviously does, but it costs lots of money. Now, they never promised up front that this would be the cost. Instead, let's get ourselves over the line, pretend $275 and 500,000 jobs rain from the sky. But the reality is this goes off budget with everything else, and it is a huge amount of money that for some reason most of the press gallery has no interest in following.
Yeah, because it's hard. I mean, you've got to do the homework to work it out. It's like a deep swamp, and you get down in there and you can't work it out. I tried today, but the one thing I did winkle out of it, so what they're going to do is they're going to have all of these massive renewable projects, and they're going to put them up for tender. And so private enterprise will tender. The most competitive tender will win the project. Let's just say to build 500 hectares of solar panels somewhere out in beautiful regional Australia. Now, what will then happen is this will get built, And the person who wins the tender contract then will operate this thing. And if it makes a profit, Paul, it's going to be paid back to the government. That's a good idea, right? That's a great idea.
Yes.
But hang on a minute. What about if it doesn't make a profit? What happens if it makes a loss? You know what's going to happen? The government, you, me and Mr. Conroy here, we're all going to write out a cheque to the people who put in the original tender so that they don't go broke. How's that good business?
Well, also, I mean, Stephen, again, how complicated you want to get with this, feel free. But the reality is that, as we know, there are things like, the entertainment industry where essentially there's very creative accounting that means you end up not making a profit, so you can run at a loss, so there's a series of things that kick your way. How do we have any trust in the process that the people who end up doing the deal with the government have to run it with the hope of getting to a profit, running it as aggressively as you would to make a profit, so that you don't end up basically sort of running 5-10% under, because there's a kick coming back if you do?
Look, I'm not quite sure why a company wants to put its own capital in and then try and run it at a loss. I have met many people at the big investment banks and the big hedge funds that set out to make losses. So while there may be some downside in some years, I don't think there's a bunch of investors who want their money invested in a way to deliberately lose money.
But creatively accounting, the government's going to tip it up. You don't lose your money.
Yeah, you don't lose your money. The government and the taxpayers give you money, and then 5 years down the track you sell it for a profit.
They want to make money. They don't actually want the government's money. They just want the certainty that they're not going to lose money to allow them to come forward with the proposals. This is not some outlandish economics here. This is the market and how it works.
But again, you've watched climate policy for 10 years, and I understand the genius of the way that they put lipstick on the pig at the last election. But it's still a damn pig, because it costs either the customer or the taxpayer money to build the infrastructure.
Well, usually customers do pay for the infrastructure, so I'm not quite sure how that's a pig. That's called sort of market economics 101. They invest money, customers pay for the service, and they usually want to make a 10, 15, 20% return. So that's sort of normal market economics.
Yeah, but if I'm a customer of the power company,
I don't
get the chance to say what the infrastructure of the power company is. It's a utility, and I want to be able to watch television at night, which means I have to have access to power, and it's the decision of the power company to go off and tell me how it's going to provide the power. That's my point. It's a utility.
Look, if you know of, I mean, other than the Enrons of this world who set out to create shortage so that they can overcharge in the spot market, which didn't end well for them or anybody involved.
Correct.
But if you know a bunch of merchant banks and investment banks out there that are going to be pitching this money in on the basis that they plan to lose money, well, I think that's a real misunderstanding of how the market works.
Okay,
Paul.
and I understand that. Nice try. But Steve, the main and central point here, Steve Price, is that the Australian taxpayer, when they are confronted by a politician saying, I'm going to borrow money to build infrastructure, all right? Now, it might be PPP for a road or something like that, but I'm going to borrow money to build infrastructure, then the taxpayer, then the voter gets to make a decision about whether they want to hire the people that are promising to do that. This government did not put that before the people. Instead, what they're going to do is turn around and say, when we came to power, there was less than 0.5 megawatt of renewable energy, and at this election, we've now got it to 5, at the next election 6, at the next election 12. So they're only going to focus on that indice, not the billions of dollars it takes to get to that number.
Yeah, and the problem the government has, I think, if you look at the politics of this, and I'd be interested to know what former Senator Conroy thinks, but Chris Bowen seems like a deranged zealot, running around driving electric cars and, patting his hand on top of solar panels. He's about to jump on a plane and fly to a climate change conference in Dubai.
Of course, you notice
why
they
you can't do it by Zoom, I don't know.
They never have those on Zoom. You'd think this is the one form of meeting you could have.
Never do it. And you're quite right. Why did no one say to him today, what's this going to cost?
Yeah.
I mean, former Senator Conroy, of course, was famously involved with the NBN, which is probably the only as big a project as what this is, all written on the back of an envelope on a plane, as we all remember. But, Stephen, don't you have to come clean with the public at some point?
Yeah, what did Kevin Rudd call his plane? Like, if this one's Toto 1, what did K. Rudd call the plane?
Well, he had a dog. Didn't he have a dog?
Yeah, did he have a nickname for it?
I don't know.
What was he, just Rudd 1?
I know what
not that I'm aware.
I know what he called it, K. Rudd 1.
Yeah, and we all know how...
I certainly never heard him call it that.
Well, of course, he'd ask other people to do it on his behalf. We joke. Now, but okay, last one here. Stephen, again, this concept of, and can you just try to explain to people here, again, well, actually, no, let's deal with the politics, right? Which is... Do you think that there's politics here, or because of its complexity, because of its opaqueness, because, frankly, as soon as you start to get into the reeds, people start to go, what's happening to the cricket, that this politics actually starts to help the government, or is there a window for the opposition that the government needs to be careful about here, because how these schemes launch is often how people start to remember them?
Yeah, look, I think that the desire for the vast majority of Australians is they want to see this transition to the renewable production.
No, they
energy. Well, I'll give you a simple stat, Steve. Australia's got the single largest amount of solar panels on its roof to any country in the world. The ordinary Australian wants solar panels on their roof. They want to see renewable energy. That's just a fact. Right. So they've actually not just voted in a poll. They voted with their feet. They voted with their own dollars, and they put solar panels.
They voted on something that had no detail.
They spent money and put solar panels on their roof, Steve. They did it.
But that's not 500 hectares of solar panels in a paddock on the
Australians
highway.
Want to see renewable energy take over, and that debate has now been lost. The Liberal Party lost the last election around this issue. They've lost a heap of their seats. They've got one of the lowest primary votes in their history. They've got one of the lowest seat representations in their history. And you'd have to say on balance that while Scott Morrison did plenty of things that turned people off, the climate issue was definitive in the last election.
So we're going to send the country broke, justifying that vote, are we?
Well, that's your characterisation. What you've got here is a desire from the Australian public to make the transition. Labor's got to get it right. So Paul's point is absolutely valid. If they leave a window, a door, a mouse hole open, the Libs will tell every lie under the sun about what it's going to cost. They'll try and pretend that there's a solution without going down the renewables. But that's just what will happen. The Albanese government needs to be careful, but they are proceeding with their policy. They said, we're going to be moving forward. They've made announcements after announcement on this issue. And this is just a way of turbocharging.
Pretty slow.
Except, having built the biggest infrastructure project in the country in many years, it does take time for things to get going. That's just the nature of the way the system works.
And I remember
you
beautifully got it off budget as well. Beautifully off budget as well. Just focus on the progress, not the dollars. All right. Now, let's talk about the school protest that took place today in Melbourne. It was actually a fizzer. Like, I know everyone's kind of lost their brains. It was like a few hundred people, and then, it's the same people trying to show off. But there's two things I wanted to talk about this. One, according to The Age, there were kids in kindergarten that were there. And secondly, the organisers of this thing are the leftiest of lefties at universities, all right? So, Steve, again, kids, when they get the opportunity to sort of show off how amazing they are and how virtuous they are, certainly in this particular sort of performative era, they're going to do it more and more. It was only hundreds, thankfully not thousands. That's what happens on the weekends. But what about those 2 points? Why the hell was a kindergarten kid there? And I think we got an image of that, which was in the Age. And it's all not organised by the school kids.
Well, of course, it's not organised by the school kids. And if you look at the pictures that Sky was running today, you can see that the agitators, the ones that wanted to cause the most disruption in CBD Melbourne today. Many of them were wearing disguises. They didn't just have the headscarves on, they had them over their mouth, dark sunglasses. And I think what really unsettled a lot of people today was the chanting of the anti-Israeli chant from the river to the sea, which we all know what that means.
Exactly.
Now, what happens there then? You've got that small group of school kids. They go back to the classroom. How would you be if you were a Jewish kid in year 9 or 10 or 11 to have some of those that you will see in those pictures on television today come back into your classroom? How does that foster harmony within our schools? I thought it was pretty ugly. I agree with you that wasn't the numbers they wanted, but I was really, really sad to see what unfolded on the steps today. I thought it was awful.
Stephen Conroy, specifically the point about a kid in kindergarten. Now, again, the image, I decided to blur the specific children's faces. Their faces are not blurred in the Age of the Sydney Morning Herald today that still have those images up online, right? But what was a high school protest, again, you know, we can have a conversation about how politically savvy a 16-year-old is, but I've got a kindergarten kid who would have no opinion on this matter whatsoever, and she's got a dad who watches the news all day, every day.
Well, look, I first of all, I think, Paul, you're probably a little on the deceiving yourself side. If you look at any of the social media that I'm sure your daughter consumes without telling you too much about,
there's no talk in our house,
disinformation.
But I get the point. There's a lot of crap out there that's filling their heads.
Yeah, and not just on TikTok, but I suspect she has seen more about it than you probably realise.
Well, Steve, you blame the parents there, don't you?
But no, exactly. So I think a kindergarten kid could only have got there if their parents have wanted to bring them there. And so I think the parents are the ones you've got to say, why have you brought a kindergarten kid? But look, it's not the first time a kid's been brought along. But I'm 100% with Steve. I mean, if these kids don't know what chanting from the river to the sea means, it means the extermination of the State of Israel. And it is not a peaceful solution. It will not see a solution. And you are, absolutely chanting a truly offensive slogan that Hamas is the architect of. And we know what, incredible butchers that they are. And they do not support a peaceful process. They do not support a two-state solution. They are not interested in peace in the Middle East. They are interested in exterminating the State of Israel.
All right, winners and losers of the week. Steve Price, who do you put the crown on as the winner or loser of the week?
I think the winner of the week's Portsea Golf Club. We managed to ban Dan Andrews.
Hey!
Definitely. That'd be my
pre-ban
winner of the week.
Before he even applies.
And the loser of the week would be Melbourne, who's going to have to put up with Kyle Sandilands and Jackie O next year.
We're going to disagree on that at another time. I'm a big fan of the King and Queen, but I cannot interrupt. I love them, all right. Now, Steve Conroy, your winner or loser, mate?
Look, I think Chris Minns has played a blinder the last couple of weeks. And I think he deserves to be the winner for the week. He's been very firm on all of this material and an absolute winner of the week. And I think the loser of the week is, I thought it would be hard for someone to top Phil Lowe's stupidity in explaining interest rates and what he thought was going to happen. But Michelle Bullock, you are the loser of the week. Blaming haircuts and dentist visits.
I don't disagree on that.
It's just absolutely insane. You are the loser of the week.
All right, thank you guys. Do appreciate it. All right, my winners of the week are none other than the great Erebus Motorsport team. They go round again in Adelaide this weekend. Fingers crossed they can get over the line. Brodie Kostecki ends up winning the Drivers' Championship, and this great team, Coca-Cola Racing, Betty Daniel, Shannon and everyone else. Barry, we love you lots. Good luck this weekend, and if you get the chance to go to Adelaide, I'll be very jealous. I had my tickets booked, flights ready, accommodation booked. And then the sickness that started with one daughter moves to another daughter, gets to the mum, and I'm out of play. There is a particularly left-wing politician in the United States by the name of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, as she is often referred to. And she thinks that the Middle East situation can be solved by hugs and understanding. My fellow Gen Xer, Dave Rubin from the Rubin Report on Rumble, disagrees. But first, here is AOC.
Ceasefire means means there is no military solution, only a diplomatic and cultural solution. A relational solution, a reckoning with ourselves and our history. That is what ceasefire now means.
It's such complete nonsense. Basically, she said there's no military solution, meaning you have to just have a ceasefire for some sort of kumbaya moment and everybody can come together and get over this stuff. Look, the Nazis were defeated militarily. We won World War II. World wars, World War I, other wars, they are won militarily, and then you get to a ceasefire, you get to an armistice agreement, you get to some sort of understanding between two warring factions. The idea right now that AOC and Ilhan Omar and so many people across the West are calling for a ceasefire, it is only because Israel is now winning, if there is a win to be had in this. If it was reversed, if right now there were more Israelis dying and there were infiltrations into Israel and the rockets that the Iron Dome takes out were actually hitting the cities, AOC would not be calling for a ceasefire. She'd be cheering it on because she would be saying, oh, the evil Israelis, the oppressors in her very warped worldview are getting exactly what they deserve. And the truth is she wants Hamas to win. So I would say, as an American, suck it, AOC.
The Marvel Studios, which have been pumping out movies for years, like Iron Man and Captain America and the Avengers, well, those used to make billions of dollars, each and every one of them. Well, the latest version is all women, all diversity, and it's the least successful opening in the franchise history. What does this tell us about our culture?
Well, I think it tells us something interesting about the stories that are the ideas of our time, meaning Marvel stories and Star Wars, these Lord of the Rings, all of these things that have now been repurposed and repackaged 100 times over. And of course, they've added the wokeism in, and they try to make Ghostbusters for women and all of these things. And even Disney themselves, they said they were going to make Marvel was going to be more for boys and Star Wars was going to be for girls. I mean, these are artificial ideas that they are putting on children related to gender. And then, of course, the stories become all muddled. What you want out of a good story is a deep truth to be told. So if you look at, for example, they were a little behind our time in terms of age, but the Harry Potter books, the stories, the archetype, the hero's journey is quite good. You don't have to be a 7-year-old to fully appreciate it. What's unfortunately happened with the Marvel movies is they've pushed all the wokeism in. They've pushed mostly gender stuff, but they've done a little bit of the race stuff as well. And then people over time, they're just like, oh, this isn't why I'm going to the movies. I'm here to be entertained, and I love the big explosions, not to be, quote unquote, taught a lesson.
Now, I was watching your show, Reuben Report. It's on Rumble, on YouTube. Go check it out. And you had some big news about Fruit Loops this week, mate, the breakfast cereal.
Did you see this one? I don't know if it made it to Fruit Loops Australia, but here in America, Fruit Loops is pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion on our children. So it's not just that to start your day as a 5-year-old, your mom's going to put a big bowl of sugar in front of you and rot your brain. Then they will also direct you on the back of the box. They will direct you to Kellogg's. That's the owner of Fruit Loops, and they also own Frosted Flakes and a whole bunch of the other brands that, kids, guys our age used to love way back when. I used to love that stuff, as everybody did. But basically, they are now directing you to children's books and other entertainment stories and things related to diversity, equity, inclusion as it pertains to gender and everything else. And it's like, man, what a perfect combination. You get these kids hopped up on sugar, their brains don't get the nourishment that they need, and then they don't get the educational nourishment that they need. So, no, how about maybe just an egg, a nice hard-boiled egg? That would do just fine for a kid.
He says that now, but when his kids want that, good luck. Thank you, Dave. We'll talk to you again next week. Quick break, back with more. I want to show you somebody who could have been very rich but ended up being very sore. More in a sec. That's our show. Thanks very much for watching. Go Yankees, go Tigers, and go Erebus. Have a great weekend.